And I'm extremely excited because we're going to have a very good conversation, right? So the gentleman that I'm going to welcome here, so I've learned a lot from him. I learned a lot. For example, I found out that actually technology currently now has the same emission that global aviation industry. Could you imagine that? We're talking about 1 or 2% of the total global carbon emission. That's significant. It's going to tell us a lot more about that, yeah? And that's a gentleman, like I say, very experienced. That technology leader is actually the senior vice president, but also the chief information officer of ASSA ABLOY. But you know what? I don't want to tell you everything. So I'd rather leave him to actually give you all the information that you will require. So stay tuned with us because I promise you, you will enjoy it.
Welcome to Renewables in Action,
your unique podcast.
Do you want to understand the renewable energy sector, its trends, business models, and insights? Are you interested in learning about the challenges and opportunities, as well as how you or your business can thrive in this new world? Welcome to Renewables in Action, the show that helps you realize your potential in this industry, which is the fastest growing source of energy in the world. Here is your host, Tony, to you.
Hello, Niklas. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very loud and clear.
Excellent. I can see the beautiful background there. All green. All green, and I believe you have your twin brother on the background.
Yeah. The more handsome one.
Sure. No, definitely. I'm sure you have nothing to be jealous of. So, Niklas, for me, it's particularly an honor to talk to you because you and I have a little history. Yes. Because before this wonderful book that you've written, the Sustainable IT Playbook for Technology Leaders, so we were in touch before because you were kind enough to reach out to me after we promoted or actually published the Sustainable IT Decoded, which was the masterclass that Google did just to reach out to IT professional, IT managers. And fortunately, I believe you were one of them, and you reached out to me and had a conversation. So it's great to be able to be back here, isn't it?
Yes, it's fantastic, and I think you should take more credit than that because I think it's been, a big source of inspiration, and also in that masterclass was Marta Muniz from IDC at the time, and she also ended up being the senior editor on the book. So I actually have two connections with great contributors with like-minded individuals like yourself. So it's me that should thank you, really.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Like I say, I'm so happy to see that not live. I know we talked about that. I also wrote a book in the past, and I know you asked you a couple of questions regarding book writing, and yeah, we're happy to give some little advice there. But let's come back to you, right? Because like I say, so I know you now, and we've been talking for a good few months. But people obviously following us don't necessarily know who you are, and I just wanted you to briefly introduce yourself. So, who is Niklas Sundberg? And what is the one thing I would say you want to give to this world?
Yes. So, yes, my name is Niklas Sundberg. I'm 44 years old. I think I've done 3 career pivots, really. One when I moved to the US when I was 17 to sort of try to pursue a career to combine both academics and ice hockey, my big passion in life. And then I ended up getting a full university scholarship to pursue ice hockey and academics. And then I was fortunate enough to play professional ice hockey after I was done with university. And then I played professional a couple of years. And then I moved into my professional field within IT and technology. And that's really where I've been in the last 20 years, sort of progressing from consulting, working with programming, databases, to IT management, senior advisory in terms of digitalization strategy, IT strategy. And 6 years ago, I landed at ASSA ABLOY, where I am now. I've been here at 6 years, 3 years as a CIO for one of our technology divisions, ASSA ABLOY Global Solutions. And I also, as part of sort of our internal journey on sustainability, we were also challenged to create our own IT strategy around and how do we facilitate sustainability within that. So then I created a sustainable IT strategy, and that sort of bore the fruition into writing the book, Sustainable IT Playbook for technology leaders, so to say.
No,
and like you said, what I want to leave passing forward towards this world is, obviously I have two small children, 3 and 6, and I want to leave a better planet than we found it in our generation. And I think I have 25 years left to work. And besides working in as a technology leaders, I also think that we have a responsibility to make sure that we do it in a sustainable way, and that we really pivot towards more renewable energy sources, consume our devices in a more sustainable way, and really pave the way for generations to come. So that is sort of my mission.
Excellent, and that's a great mission to have. And I was actually quite curious, because I'm sure there's a lot of young people that will be watching us, and I'm sure they will be impressed by your journey. But what is the one thing that you picked up from being a ice hockey professional and moving into your career? So how has it really helped you, if anything?
Yes. Well, I think on a personal level, I think perseverance, obviously, to understand that you need hours of practice. Success doesn't happen overnight. So you need more than 10,000 hours of practice in order to master something. And the second thing is really that teamwork, camaraderie, that, the power of a team is so much stronger than the individual. So I really like the passion that I have today as a leader today, to develop people, to see them grow, see them excel, and to also pass them on, and to see them grow their career and develop the future leaders of tomorrow. So really, perseverance and team leadership, I think, is essential leadership traits that I've learned from ISO, for sure.
And I'm sure that definitely could be seen from your career. When you mentioned the 10,000 hours, made me remember the Malcolm Gladwell book that I wrote, that I read some time ago. So I'm sure you probably would have seen that as well. And clearly now you are recognized as one of the leaders in sustainable IT. That's clearly a field that is emerging, and you're really driving this forward. And I just wanted to find out from you, so why is sustainability so crucial for IT sector? So, and what kind of environmental impact can we see from sustainable IT practices? If you can shed some light there, so that people are really aware of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when I started looking at this, I was also blissfully unaware. I haven't really given it that much thought. But as I started researching this and I started getting into the numbers, I actually had to go back and double check, triple check to see that, is this actually the case? But unfortunately, this is the case. And if we only look at data centers in the world, they are consuming and emitting just as much CO2 emissions as the whole global aviation industry in the world, 1 to 2% of them. If we take ICT sector, which data center is a subsector of, they are emitting somewhere between 3 to 4% of the world's emissions today. And just looking ahead, in 2020, for example, we consumed 25,000 terawatt hours across the world. And obviously, with the macro trends that we have in terms of digitalization, electrification, we're going to see an explosion of energy demand in the world. And looking ahead to 2030, this demand is expected to be somewhere between 40,000 terawatt hours as an expected case. But the worst case is actually somewhere north of 60 or even 70,000 terawatt hours. And if we're not careful when it comes to technology and IT, we are going to consume 8,000 terawatt hours of energy by 2030. So if you take the baseline of 25 to 40 and divide 8,000 by 40, that's 20% of the world's emissions just from IT. And I think that's a very staggering number. And I think it's a very important number to watch out, to make sure that doesn't become the so to say. I think we have the opportunity here to develop new technology, solar, wind, hydro, and so forth. I think it's our responsibility also as technology leaders to make sure that when we are part of this great journey of digitalization, democratizing the world, bringing knowledge and the power of education to people across the world. We also have a major responsibility to make sure that we do it in a sustainable way. To build sustainable digital infrastructure. So that's the one part regarding the energy. The second part is regarding the electronic waste and all of the IT hardware that we are consuming in the world. Just by 2025, we're going to consume somewhere between 55 and 60 billion devices in circulation. So that's a massive amount. Today, we have roughly 5.5 billion laptops in circulation in the world. But then obviously with the explosion of IoT devices, sensors and so forth, we're going to see a rapid increase of IT hardware going forward. Just today, we are polluting the world with 57 million tons of electronic waste per year. That's the same weight as the Great Chinese Wall every year. Or if you load up 126,000 jumbo jets filled with electronic waste. So obviously, this is a massive, massive problem. And this is the biggest waste stream in the world, which is a really, really scary figure. If we're not careful, this number will rise from 57 million to 70 or even 75 million by 2030. So we also need to make sure that we change the approach, move from a linear flow, how we manage IT hardware, to a more circular flow, a more regenerative flow, to make sure that we feed back plastics, metals, rare earth metals, and so forth into the sourcing and the manufacturing processes. Because at the rate we're going, we're also consuming 1.8 of the world's resources every year in the rate that the world can regenerate the natural resources. So in a few months, in August, we have already consumed all of the natural resources collectively in the world in August. We still have another 4.5 months to go, unfortunately.
Yeah, I saw those information. I must admit that I was very, very impressed by that. So surprised, I would say. And I actually believe that your projection is probably even conservative, because if we're looking at the rate of acceleration for population growth of now 8 billions, and then even see, first of all, in my household, because I got 2 sons as well. So my son, they always want to have the new laptop, the new phones. So what you're saying is we're accumulating those electronic devices, and we're so quick at changing them, we don't necessarily care about what's going to happen with that waste that we create, basically.
Just a smartphone. That's as an example, is 70 kilos over a 3-year period, for example, or a laptop is somewhere between 300 kilos to even 700 kilos, or the most heavy duty ones is up to 1,000 kilos per device over a 4-year period. So the number is definitely not insignificant. And I think here the scary figure is that corporations around the world, we only see that the take back or the recycling rate is only 10% handled in a transparent and in a good chain of custody way of managing recycling goods for electronic waste. So we're coming from a very, very low number at the moment, unfortunately.
So we still have 90% that's actually out there that's not been recycled.
Yes. And another example would be Apple, for example, where they have this fantastic robot called Daisy, which can pick apart an Apple iPhone in a matter of minutes and extract all of the different rare earth minerals and gold and so forth, and lithium and what have you. And from what I understand is that they don't get back enough smartphones into circulation in order for them to be able to have a reliable supply chain to actually feed back all of the rare earth materials into the sourcing or the manufacturing process. So I think we have some work to do to make sure that we close the loop, to make sure that we also secure a reverse logistics flow for these type of assets. So I think in the end, it's also an educational piece. I think we need to bring more awareness on this problem. I also think that we also have a lot of the tools available for us, but we just need to change our thinking a little bit regarding this, and to inform and so forth. And I trust you will come home to your sons and tell them that they need to manage their electronic waste in a more responsible way going forward.
Well, I tell you one thing. I tell them that they need to listen to this podcast, because what happened, he told me that just before. So the gentleman I was interviewing just had been obviously at Harvard, because I think your book, you were telling me, just been picked up by a professor at Harvard and made a course out of it, right? So that was actually quite impressive.
Yes, that's for sure. That is a bucket list moment in my life, for sure. That the book has been picked up by Harvard, a professor named Ahmed Anter, who picked it up. He created a course out of the book, and now it's being taught at Harvard, which is obviously a fantastic opportunity for teaching the brilliant minds of the future of sustainable IT. And I was really humbled to also have the opportunity to lecture.
Yeah, as opposed to be a Harvard graduate, at least a Harvard supplier. So
yes, exactly. So I didn't make it to Harvard, but my book made it to Harvard. So
which is even, in terms of, let me tell you one thing, in terms of legacy, is even better.
Yes.
So talking about the sustainable IT, because I think one of the things that also I remember in our conversation before you actually produced the book, you were telling me that a number of your colleagues within IT, so we're sort of progressively getting aware of this issue and challenge of sustainable IT, but also this opportunity that it presents to them. And but they didn't really know how to actually proceed forward. According to you, what are the significant challenges technology leaders, face today when they're looking to implement sustainable IT practices, and any idea how to overcome them? And we're going to come in the book, because I know you definitely mentioned a number of solutions there, but if you can give us some snippet.
Well, I think first and foremost, I think the good thing is that the issue is getting more and more attention. The awareness is rising. So I think a lot of people are understanding the why. Why is this a big problem? Why is this important? Why should we pay attention to this? Then I think obviously it's important to also look at the context that you're operating in. For example, if you have a big legacy of data centers, a lot of servers on premise and so forth, or if you're a startup and you're born in the cloud, then you probably don't have the same sort of legacy. Then you have other type of challenges, other types of considerations. We talked about the IT hardware and so forth, which is one area. I think that the biggest factor and really is to establish a starting point, to establish your baseline. Because if you have a baseline, and the baseline can be up and down 10% in terms of, it doesn't need to be 100% right. I think the important thing is to at least arrive at a number, and hopefully you built your baseline bottom up, so you can also identify different types of action areas that you can start addressing. Because once you have your baseline, I would really recommend to go out and simulate a number of different target states and see, okay, how aggressive can we be to sort of halve our CO2 footprint, for example. In the book, I have an example of a model company with 10,000 employees. And by that simulation, I've calculated that company would roughly emit 7,000 tons of CO2 from their IT operations on a yearly basis. So what I think is, in terms of the art of the possible, is to look at the different action areas and to see, okay, what's the opportunity to halve this? What is the opportunity to reduce it by 2/3? I also think it's important to recognize that we don't have all of the technology available. I think we need also more and more sustainable way of producing IT hardware, for example, to be able to get to net zero. But I think we are at a very good starting point where we can at least halve the CO2 footprint, or even reduce it by 2/3. But in order for us to get the net zero, we need to look at some more regenerative solutions. We need to work with our vendors like HP, Lenovo, and Dell, and so forth, to make sure that they produce IT equipment in a more sustainable way. Because if you buy a laptop today, for example, from Dell, for example, then 80% of the emissions has already been consumed before you receive that in your hand, for example. So what you can impact as an end user, either as a company or as a consumer in your private life, is roughly 12 to 14%. So obviously we need to impact the supply chain, make sure that we also impact the vendors and make sure that they have a more regenerative approach to how they create IT assets or IT hardware going forward.
Okay, so that's excellent. And I know that the book that you now talk about, so that's what you see on your background.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been a huge success, right? So and like I say, so I still remember when we're just thinking about putting that, pen to paper and just going through the whole process, but you now have it live and is available. And I looked at that in the book. You talked about essentially three parts. So there is one part talking about the why, one part talking about the what, and also the how. I don't know whether I've described it well, but why did you want it to structure that this way? So tell us the journey. So when obviously a new reader is picking up that book, what do you want? What do you want that journey to be for that reader?
Yes. Well, I think if you're unfamiliar to sustainable IT, I would really recommend to understand the why. Why is this important? What is the background of climate change? What are the different policies that have been put in place? What are the emerging policies that is emerging going forward? That's also going to steer how we manage sustainable IT going forward. But then also, it's written like a playbook. So once you've read the first two chapters, which is really the introduction, the why, the playbook structure when it comes to the what is really depending on the if you are a software engineer, if you are a developer, if you're an architect, then you can go down and look at that specific chapter and look at application and data. If you're a CIO or CTO, for example, then you want to have a more holistic view. You want to understand how the impact of data centers and cloud, for example, impacts, because that's usually a big source of energy, a big source of cost. So there's also obviously an opportunity to optimize cost and to be sustainable in the same way. If you're managing a large estate, for example, energy management for your end user equipment is quite important. But also looking at your supply chain. What are the type of suppliers that you're working with? What are the commitments that they have brought forward? And are they aggressive enough in terms of being in the net race to net zero, for example? If you take Microsoft, I think they've been quite aggressive, but also recognizing that they don't have all of the answers. They have set a target. They've set a target to be net zero by 2030. And then they've also set a target to give back all of the CO2 that they have emitted since the inception of the company in 1973 or 1974. I think that's a very, very aggressive target. I think it sets a great lighthouse example for a lot of other companies to follow. If you look at the supply chain within IT and tech, you still see a lot of companies having a net zero target by 2050. I don't think that's aggressive enough. I think that's something that needs to be brought forward to at least 2040, maybe even 2035. So I think we need some stronger legislation in order to make that happen. I think we need to also, when we talk about circularity, I think it's important to, in Europe, for example, we have a new legislation coming with right to repair, for example, where today maybe we dispose a laptop and sometimes, and in most cases, the opportunity to replace the battery or the motherboard or the keyboard or a cracked screen, it's too expensive to do that, and it's better to just discard the whole assets, so to say. And I think we need to find ways to actually just replace that component that has been broken rather than disposing the full assets, so to say. So I think we need to become a lot more progressive in those areas. So in terms of digging down into the different areas of the what, I think it depends on who's reading it. I would read it as a playbook. I would really dig down into the chapter that falls into the interest of your profile and the level of interest that you have for that field. If it's software engineering, for example, or if it's cloud and data centers or a more holistic perspective. But then the third part is really the why. And that's also my vision with the book. I wanted to educate, I wanted to inspire, but the most important for me is to activate. And the biggest reward that I have when people are picking up the book is when people are feeding back to me and they come back to me and tell me, this is what we're doing, this is how we're taking action, this is what we're seeing as a result. Because that is really the greatest reward, because then we have put the power at the hands of people to make sustainable change. So obviously the why is so important. Start with the baseline, get your starting point, start understanding where can you make the biggest impact, so to say. So that would be the logical steps, I would say, to read the book. Pick it up and look at the different areas that falls of interest. But don't forget to activate yourself and get started by the why, by the how.
Yeah. And would you say that the book is written for big companies, big corporations, or even small company can also, let's say if you have, for example, one or two people, even just one person,
Yeah, I would say that it's written for a wide audience. I think sustainable IT is a collective problem that we need to understand, because maybe if you're just a small company of 1 to 2 people, you're probably sourcing a lot of solutions, a lot of cloud solutions, for example. And I think it's just as important to understand what is the footprint of your supply chain and to make sustainable choices around that. And that small company that you're building, that could obviously become bigger over time, where you can scale globally and so forth. So I think it's important to recognize how you can build sustainable digital infrastructure across the board, and obviously not only apply it in your professional capacity, but also in your personal capacity as well, because electronic waste really has no boundaries between the two.
Yeah, definitely. I think I definitely picked up that you were saying that the e-waste is the biggest waste stream in the world, and that I still can't get my head around it. So let me ask you a question, because in the industry I work in, especially region I tend to focus a lot of my time on, those are emerging markets. So yeah, you talked about obviously Africa, you talked about Southeast Asia and all those places. And sometimes, so if people hear about e-waste or maybe sustainable IT, they may be tempted to believe that this is first world issue, right? So what would you say, what is the role of sustainable IT practices in emerging markets? And what kind of unique challenge and solution would you imagine exist in those regions?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here, then we're coming in on the social issues as well, because I think, if we start with maybe not the e-waste, but if we start with, when the products and solutions are being created, for example, when they're being sourced or manufactured, I think we also have a social responsibility to make sure that we source in a responsible way, that we have fair market conditions, that we make sure that we are not using hazardous substances either in the factory or within the product itself to manufacture them. I think it's important to have, pension schemes, fair market hours and so forth. Child labor is obviously not a great thing. So the social aspects is just as important in the early phases, and not only think about the E in ESG, so to say, the environmental aspects. I think it's equally important to also pay attention to the social aspects regarding that in emerging markets. Having said that, I think there is obviously a great opportunity in that as well, to leverage IT for society or tech for good, because I think also the great opportunity as I see as well. And if you take Microsoft Office as an example, Microsoft Windows or Office has really democratized the world as well by bringing power to people all across the world, and having the information highway at the hands of their fingertips as well. I think you and I have talked about it in the past as well, that knowledge is power, but applied knowledge is really great power, so to say. So I think that is really sort of the tipping point, which I think it's really important as well to focus on the social issues around here as well. But when it comes to electronic waste, and to make sure that this doesn't come back into landfills in third world countries and so forth. I think it's really, really important to work with reputable partners to make sure that they have transparency, they can show chain of custody of material, they can show that the material has been handled in a safe way and it doesn't end up in a landfill somewhere. Because I think that's also not only within electronic waste we see this, but also with textiles, for example. That is, unfortunately, you see a lot of big heaps of textiles being ending up in landfills in Africa, for example, which I think is very, very unfortunate. It's a very, very irresponsible way of the retail and the fast fashion industry to manage that. If we are churning out 100 million ton of textile every year, I think we also have a great responsibility to make sure that this is managed in a more sustainable way. It can't be that it's more cost efficient to create new cotton rather than recycled old cotton, and that's how it's being handled today. So I think the electronic waste, the retail industry has a lot to learn and a lot to do their homework on, for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely subscribe to what you said there, and just sort of to back you up a little bit, just to say that many of those big companies in IT end up operating globally, which means that what we don't want is have one set of rules in one area, in the other one they won't do that, which is obviously not a good practice. That's what we want. We don't want them to be virtuous company, let's say, in the first world, so to say, and go to other places and not apply that. That is definitely one thing you and I, we're not going to be agreeing with such approaches and practices. And the second thing is, what I sometimes realize is, any company should realize that they're either a big company or you're in the supply chain of big companies. So yes. Ultimately, you need to understand, obviously, what rule they actually they're abiding by, to make sure that you as well, making sure that you're going to be affected one way or another. So that's why your book is so powerful. And I think, again, would like to thank you for taking the effort to putting that in that wonderful book. So, talking about future of sustainable IT, how do you foresee the evolution of sustainable IT in the next decade? Any idea there?
Well, I think that the biggest opportunity, obviously, is that we've seen, I think, the entrance of the smartphone was sort of a tipping point in terms of technology advancement. I think with generative AI, which is sort of just exploded now, and has also sort of democratized AI, because we've been talking about AI for the last 10 years, but now it's at the fingertips of anyone really to use OpenAI and so forth, and generative AI. So I think we have a big responsibility to make sure that we build digitalization in a sustainable way going forward. Because what I said earlier in the podcast, obviously, is that the massive explosion of energy demand is obviously just going to drive this with AI, autonomous cars, the massive amount of data that's required to drive autonomous cars, for example, but also the data that we are storing for data lakes. All companies want to be data-driven and have more insights about the customers, their supply chain, and so forth. So, but the sad truth is that 70% of all the data that we store today just ends up in an archive. It's never to be revisited again. So, and that comes back to our emails as well, for example. We're not great at archiving our emails, so to say. It's somewhere up there in the cloud. It's somebody else's problem. So we are sort of building this virtual e-waste site somewhere, but we can't see it in front of our eyes. So I think my vision for the next decade is obviously that we can keep the energy demand at the same level or better when we build up digital infrastructure going forward. I really foresee that we need to make IT hardware a lot more circular. We need to make sure that it's a lot more modular, that we incorporate sustainability by design into our products. We've seen great examples already. We have Fairphone coming out of Netherlands, which is a phone that could be taken apart within 60 seconds. Michael Dell has tasked his engineering team at Dell to come up with a computer that can also be taken apart in 60 seconds. And when these type of technology, these type of solutions hit the mainstream, I think we'll also see a big pivot in terms of how we start consuming IT. Because if you can just replace the keyboard or the screen on your laptop and maybe just add more memory or add another core processors rather than replacing the whole laptop, I think we're also on a very good trajectory to become a lot more sustainable. So I think we're in a great decade of climate change, obviously, but I think we're also in a great decade of the information highway in terms of how generative AI is going to sort of transform a lot of jobs out there in a lot of different industries. And we need to make sure that we are digitalizing in a sustainable way. And then obviously the key field that you are in, electrification and the sourcing of renewable energies is key to this. Because if you don't build up sustainable renewable energy like water, hydro, and wind, then we're not going to be able to have this drive for digitalization going forward, because we cannot just use more coal to drive that change. Today, 41% of the emissions today comes from energy generation. So it's a massive chunk. And then transportation sector is 14%. So those two categories together, out of the 59 gigatons that we are emitting of CO2 in the world, is coming from energy creation and transportation. So these are two major sectors that we need to change together with building out sustainable digital infrastructure, for sure.
Excellent. So last two questions for you. So I know the book is very practical, so giving really, like you said, because applying the knowledge is really what is important. I definitely back you up on that. So what advice would you give to new technology leaders who are just beginning their journey towards sustainable IT? What are the right steps? I know you talked about the baseline. So why else? So that they really know how to go about it.
Well, I think the great news about this is that to educate yourself, to really show an interest in this, because this is a great career field going forward. I think the companies are screaming for sustainable IT specialists out there. And I think this is really a great field to get into, to get in front of, to educate and have a good trajectory going forward. Because this is a fairly new topic. All companies is going to want sustainable IT specialists. So I think great growth opportunity together with being data-driven and generative AI, data and analytics. I think these are great career fields to pursue going forward. And I get very happy when I have students, university students, for example, sending me their papers on position papers for what they are seeing to how we can improve cloud and data centers, for example. So I see great work coming out of university world already, which is really comforting that we are also having a great pool of resources to fill this void that we have at the moment in terms of sustainable IT.
Excellent. So let me just ask you a question, because you now written the book and it's out there and it's a huge success. How does it feel to be a successful author?
Well, I'm a quite humble person, so I think I want the book to speak for itself. I like I said before, I'm quite overwhelmed by this. I'm the happiest thing for me, and the greatest reward is obviously to put this book into as many hands as possible. But the greatest reward for me is really to see the actions that people are taking, where you hear about great success stories, where people are coming back to me and sharing what they're doing, how they're making an impact, because that is really sort of the great teamwork that we can achieve together. I'm just a facilitator of knowledge. Now the world is applying that knowledge, and that is the greatest reward to me, for sure.
Would you be humble enough to accept the Nobel Prize for Literature?
That's for sure. I don't think it qualifies in that category, but it is something.
Oh, you never know. It's literature, right? So they never say that it's also literature, it's sustainable IT. I'll put your name down there. So, Niklas, thank you very much for this wonderful interview. Again, congratulations on this undertaking that you've done. Like I say, now you have a book that is out there. I really, really wish that would not be your only book, because there's so many other aspects that needs to be covered. And you say, hey, you have another 20 years to work, but the 20 years after that, I would like you to write as many books as possible, because there's many people that would like to get even more information and knowledge from you. So thank you very much for your time, Niklas.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, Tony.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in and listening to this episode of Renewables in Action. I hope you learned one or two things today. If you have, please do take action. Also, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any other platform that you like. You can reach out to me, Tony T, on LinkedIn to connect, to share your feedback. I look forward to speaking with you. Until then, may the sun be with you. See you next time on the Renewables in Action podcast.